Check the description for the following discount codes.
Now, I've already had a belt tensioner system for some time now, the PT Actuator Tension O, and I've done a review of that on the channel. This belt tensioner system that we have today is a very different beast compared to the PT Actuator Tension R. What we've got here is the equivalent to like a high-end wheelbase, but in the world of belt tensioners. What do I mean by that? In the world of wheelbases and steering wheels, you can get low-end, kind of entry-level stuff that has a relatively weak motor, but then goes through a gearbox or a series of cogs and a belt to up the torque to something more usable. In the high end, when it comes to wheelbases, we have direct drive, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of, and that literally means that your steering wheel is straight on the end of the shaft coming out of the motor, literally directly driven by the motor itself. No gears, no belts. So no play, no lash, no latency, so to speak, between the time the motor turns and the lash is all and the clearances are all taken up by the gears and the teeth. It's all instant and insanely high detailed, and obviously that's what we all want when it comes to steering wheels and force feedback. The way this belt tensioner system, the Qubic system's BT1, it works exactly the same way. Each of the two belts that are attached to me, or you if you choose to buy one, are that's just attached to my magnetic microphone mount. There's a reason I didn't have the belt on. Each of these is attached to its own motor, directly driven. No gears, no belts. Literally these belts, no belts. Apart from these belts are directly attached to the two motors. And the motors used in this system are the same motors used in some of their motion systems. Qubic systems that's kind of like the consumer sort of part of the company. They're a much bigger organisation. They do really high-end commercial grade motion systems as well as stuff for the military. And I got a really slightly sidetracked here. I'll show you it in a second, I promise. I got a really interesting 2-hour tour of their factory and offices over like video call, not in person, and got to see where everything's made, where everything's developed, where everything's tested, and how they operate. And the place is immaculately kept. If I was to run a production facility, this is how it would be. And their priorities are quality, not over profit, because obviously you have to make a profit, you're a business, but quality above everything else almost, you know, aside from making money. The attention to detail on everything is super high. The testing regime for everything is super in-depth and thorough. And they try and do everything that they can in-house. So nothing's kind of farmed out to the east, you know, Chinese factories which can do things for far, far cheaper than what we can in Europe and UK. That's not the case. It's all done in-house or very local, you know, I've forgotten what country they're actually from now. Was it Poland? Yeah, Polish. So things that, even like the circuit boards, they are produced in Poland rather than having them done somewhere in China for probably half the price. That way they have much better control over everything that comes to them and the quality, and they can make revisions faster and prototype things faster, which all makes sense. This does, of course, mean it isn't a cheap belt tensioner, and we'll get to that a bit later on in the video. But what I want you to understand is this is a quality piece of equipment. You know, using direct drive motors equivalent to what you might find in a wheelbase, or that they actually use in their higher motion systems, is not something you would normally find in a belt tensioner system. As I say, like my old Tension R had, you know, small motor with a gearbox, and it was quite, well, at the time I didn't think it was that noisy, but now I've heard this one, which basically makes no noise. The Tension R now sounds noisy, similar to how a Logitech, you know, G920, G29 steering wheel is with that sort of cold system. You'll know what I mean if you've heard one, compared to like a direct drive wheel that makes no noise at all. Anyway, enough waffle. Let me show you what comes in the box to begin with, and then I'll talk about how this actually works and show you it installed. So have a look at what came in the box.
This is everything that comes in the box. Starting off on the left here with obviously a UK power cable, a USB-B to USB-A for our data. We then get a quick start guide in this little plastic bag, along with something else at the back here. I haven't got that out yet, so we'll see what that is. But there's your documentation. We've then got the power supply itself. I think this is a Meanwell branded power supply. Yes, it is. And it's 24 volts, 15 amps, which is a 360 watt maximum, if that will focus. Yeah, there it is. So a decent power supply. This is a fanless power supply. They did do one with a fan, and people kind of moaned that you could hear the fan when it was in use. So this one has no active cooling. And what's interesting is this should be basically silent because it's direct drive with two separate motors. There's no gearbox to make any noise. It's the equivalent of having two small wheelbase motors basically, so should be super silent, which I guess is why people could hear the fans from that. Now, the main unit itself, the reason I'm doing it like this and not showing it to the camera is because it weighs just shy of 20 kilos, or there'll be 42, 43 pounds. And that's obviously, it's too heavy for me to hold up to the camera. So we're getting a bit of a close-up walk around of it now. I'm going to assume these vents are for cooling. This is a display of some sort, and I believe it can brake lights and other random things. I'll expand upon that once I've actually used it. Obviously the Qubic Systems logo there. The reason I've got it sat on the back here, you just see there's basically nothing. The reason it's sat on magazines is because the underneath has little screws like this protruding. I didn't want to scratch up my bar, so that's why it's sat on magazines. We've then got two mounting brackets, and these are what I believe to be seatbelt guides that go in your seat. So like where they come across over towards your shoulders, I believe these go in there it's like a frictionless surface to help the belts move easier. But I may be wrong because I haven't obviously installed it yet. I then also got the world's biggest bag of desiccant. This is huge. I could use that as a pillow, along with the world's smallest bag of desiccant. I almost thought it was salt. Now, the power and the USB plugs on the underneath of this. I will just try and turn it over, but I can do it with one hand. Yeah, it's not too bad. So, they go underneath this sticker here. See where it says USB and then power? There's obviously this warning sticker on here to begin with, just to remind you not to connect the power supply when it's powered, i.e. don't plug it in if it's turned on. Now, it doesn't appear to be an on and off switch, or is that behind here as well? Oh, I think that might be behind here. That would make sense, wouldn't it? I was going to say, otherwise it would have to be a case of unplugging the USB. But yeah, this is what the main unit looks like. 20 kilos of twin direct drive. I mean, you heard the metal and you probably saw that bow as I let it kind of fall down there. So that is hefty, and that is build quality, proper build quality. These seatbelt pieces here, I believe the way it works is you clamp your existing harness, or whatever harness you bought to go with this, to these. So that way it should fit on any seatbelt, any harness that fits within that width. In fact, I must have another pair of these plates and some screws somewhere in the packaging that I've not found yet, because otherwise there's no way for that to clamp anything. So yes, I'm sure I'll find those, and I'll show you it all installed anyway. But that's what you get in the box, hopefully, along with a couple of additional plates for you to be able to clamp your harness in position.
Yeah, as I said in that clip, because of its weight, I couldn't hold it up to the camera to give you a close-up walk around. Now, one slight correction, I said it weighs 19 kilos or just under 20. That was the weight on the box, actually. So that includes the power supply and the brackets and the nuts and bolts. I think the actual unit itself weighs about 13 kilograms, but still a substantial lump considering what it is. And again, a testament to the quality of the device. And yeah, I also mentioned, I think there might have been another box in the packaging, and there was. Here's a picture of that box, and that had all the extra fixings and bits and bobs in that you need to put it all together. So I was super impressed, not only with my factory tour, but once I got the unit, with how it feels and the quality and the weight of it. You know, considering there's only some circuitry and a couple of motors in there, it shows you how good a quality those direct drive motors are. So yeah, that's what came in the box. Now let's have a look at it installed behind me on here, give you a little close-up walk around of that. And so you can see how it's installed. You can see where I've got you can see the anti-friction sort of inserts for the belt that go on the top of the seat here. And then you'll see where the seat belts are clamped to, or where the clamps clamp the belt from the BT1 to the harnesses, the belts that I've got fitted to my rig. And you can see how it's you know, mounted to my aluminium profile there. And eventually at some point in this video, you'll see underneath where the connections are, the USB, and there is one there for an emergency stop. It doesn't come with an emergency stop button, but you can plug one in there. And then of course the power goes in as well. There's no on and off switch. That's what there's literally two things that I don't like about this. One is there's no on and off switch on the unit. And I think that would be really useful, because when you read through the installation instructions, there's a lot of things that they repeatedly say to make sure it's powered off, which means I have to unplug it from the wall or unplug the power brick itself. You can reach both ends of the unit from your seat like this. I'm tapping the right hand end here, and now I'm tapping the left hand end. There could easily be a toggle switch fitted to either end, or even an emergency stop for you to whack if need be, you know, although a power switch would do the same thing, because it is in arm's reach, unless you've got, you know, T-Rex type arms. So I'd like to see a power switch. And the only other thing that I didn't like, this quick start guide, as it is labelled there, is not actually a quick start guide. This contains safety information, specifications, things you shouldn't do, things you should do, and then just a QR code to take you to the actual installation instructions. A quick start guide, and I'm just being picky because I found it funny that it's called a quick start guide, but with this you cannot get started quickly. You can't do anything. It just tells you what the bits and bobs are and gives you the measurements and the safety warnings. A quick start guide should be a guide that gets you started quickly, which is why I picked it up, because I thought, oh, quick start guide, perfect. What do I need to do? Look through it. No idea. Still no idea. So then I had to go to the website and look at the installation PDF and follow it that way. It's not complicated. You just bolt the two brackets on and, you know, attach the belts from BT1 to your harnesses, to your belts, and make sure they're fully extended. They give you the measurements of them pulled fully all the way out, and just do that, and then plug it in, and then it's software time. But yeah, it would have been nice to actually have a quick start guide in the quick start guide. So those are my only two complaints: no on and off switch, and a quick start guide that isn't a quick start guide. So now let's have a little talk about, well, I'll put a clip up of me racing with it in use now, so you can hear, I was about to say how loud it is. It isn't loud at all. You can hear how quiet it is. I actually put my microphone on my rear PT actuator. You'll see it in the frame there. So it's probably only 6 or 8 inches away from the belt tensioner from the BT1 itself. And there's basically no sound coming from it at all. And they've changed the power supply. The original power supply they used had a fan built in that was reasonably noisy from what they tell me. They've now got a different power supply which no longer has a fan in. So there's essentially, and I've turned, obviously in that clip, if it's still playing, I've got none of the game sounds on either, which is really weird. Racing with no sound, super strange. But yeah, there's nothing else in the room. So if this was to make noise, you would hear it, especially with that mic only a few inches away from the BT1. Now, belt tensioners are, if you're not familiar with them, probably should have said this at the start, belt tensioners are one of the only ways we can simulate deceleration in a sim. Because we're never, even with a motion system, you're not actually ever moving forward for any duration of time to be able to then decelerate. If you're not traveling at a speed, there's nothing to decelerate from. Now, some people like to have the sim rig go in reverse when you brake. That's not something I like, because even though it could feel similar to braking in that your harnesses, if you're wearing them, would be pulling against your chest. In real life, the harnesses aren't pulling against your chest. You're pushing against the harnesses as your momentum and your inertia is still trying to move forward. As the vehicle is slowing down, the vehicle's never actually going backwards unless it's in reverse. And the problem we have with using that, or the problem I have with using it, I know some people like to, and that of course is fine. So everyone's preference is fine. The problem I have with that is that my eyes very much tell me that my entire sim rig has just pulled me backwards. So I know I'm going backwards. So I don't like using that to simulate braking. With active belts, active harnesses, they will progressively squeeze you as you decelerate and as you brake to replicate or simulate the feeling of you in real life pushing against the harnesses as your vehicle slows down in real life. And it works super, super well. I absolutely loved it with my Tension R, and I absolutely love it with this. This system does feel noticeably smoother, and of course it's quieter. Can I tell the difference from a response point of view? Probably not, because it isn't like force feedback on a steering wheel where every little detail of what's happening, with your tyres and your suspension against the road is fed back through the wheel. This is a much simpler simulation, whereby you're slowing down, and in real life the car slows down first. Your body wants to keep going and the harnesses prevent you from moving. So it's quite a easy one to simulate. So albeit we've got direct drive motors, which are going to be nigh on instant response. It's definitely the best way of doing it compared to motors with a gearbox or a belt-driven reduction gearbox, for example. Whether the response is noticeable in sim, I couldn't really say, to be honest. But it is super smooth. There's no cogging, because what you do feel through your belts is exactly what's happening at the other end. So if you have got like a geared system, one of the things I did notice is this feeling smoother compared to the Tension R. It's not that the Tension R was rough, but then when you go over to something that's direct drive and super smooth, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can feel the difference in the way those belts are tensioning against me. It almost feels like the gear-driven one almost felt a bit grainy, is a good way of describing it, now that I've felt one that is direct drive and smoother. Normally when we talk about direct drive, we'd be talking about power as well, but obviously with the belt tensioning system, you don't want silly power, because you don't want to be dislocating your shoulder or crushing your chest under the strength of the belts. But there's more than enough power with these motors. I think the default settings, I pretty much halved everything on the default settings, because I was like, well, that's actually squeezing me a bit more than I would like it to, And the way you kind of set it up is you get in and you put your belt on and you pull them just tight enough so that you can just about get your hands underneath the belt, but without any slack. And that's how they tell you how to set the tension. And then of course it works from there. So it's great for simulating deceleration. It can also simulate cornering, high-speed cornering. If you think like when you corner fast, your body will want to go to the outside of the corner. So if I'm cornering right, my body will want to move left. That's why we have bolsters in bucket seats to help keep us in place along with our harnesses. So part of you will shift this way, and the left-hand harness in a right-hand corner, you would feel that you're pushing against that more than you would the right-hand harness. So that's simulated as well. And again, this is all based on the telemetry from the sim that we're in. So the faster you're going, the more pronounced that feeling of being pushed against the belt, or in this case, the belt squeezing you, is. And that all works really, really nicely. Now, there's some other effects that can be used. This one has, this belt simulator offers tactile feedback, which is something I've not experienced before from a belt tensioner. Tactile feedback, similar to what you would find using tactile transducers or a Buttkicker, or even the U-shaped kits from Sim Racing Studio, and on a lesser degree, the Next Level Racing haptic, HF8 haptic gaming pad, whatever it's called, with the little vibration motors in. That's all forms of haptic feedback. So things like engine vibrations, road textures, lumps and bumps, rumble strips. If you go off on the grass, you know, you're going to get your vibrations. All things that are done using those systems. And when I was told about this, I kind of assumed the motors themselves would oscillate at whatever frequency is chosen to replicate whatever type of lump or bump or engine vibration they're replicating. And I thought the whole unit would vibrate, as in the entire assembly, because the motors would be sort of shaking themselves, so to speak. And I was surprised to find that that isn't the case. What actually happens, and I'll put up a clip where I've turned the sort of vibrations up quite high. This is the engine vibration that you'll see in this clip. You should be able to see my belts and me vibrating as I sit in my seat. And what actually happens, rather than the whole assembly vibrating like a tactile transducer, like a Buttkicker, it is actually the belts that are vibrating. So it's like they're oscillating between a particular amount of tension and then, I guess, less tension, and then back to the previous amount of tension, then less tension. And it's that oscillation, sort of on-off oscillation at a specific frequency that generates the vibrations. And what happens is if you actually undo the seat belts, so they're slack, you don't feel the vibration anymore. When they're done up tight and they're pulling against your seat, and you feel it through the whole of the seat, and you can feel it through the rig, because the belts are tight. And I guess as they squeeze kind of off and on at the frequency the motors are oscillating at, it makes everything else vibrate. When you disconnect them so they're slack, the vibration disappears. And I in my head, like I said, I pictured the motors oscillating, causing themselves to vibrate, and then that they're making the whole unit vibrating because it's bolted to the rig, it acting a bit like a Buttkicker or a tactile transducer. Same thing, just not branded. But yeah, it's not, it's the belts. And this makes it really interesting. I thought this is really cool. We're going to have belt tensioners and basically a Buttkicker or tactile transducers built into one package. But because of the way it works through the seat belts, it doesn't feel like a tactile transducer, like a Buttkicker. You can tell, it's weird because you are vibrating. And it's kind of coming through you, almost through you first. It's hard to explain, but if you've had tactile transducers, Buttkickers, and you try this, you can tell the difference. So some things worked okay, and some things I was like, no, that doesn't really work compared to, you know, tactile transducers, or like with a motion system like this, where the actuators are, you know, doing the lumps and bumps as I'm driving over textures, just like your car would. You know, it feels very different to how this does it. It's good to have the ability to try out these different effects, and if you don't have any other form of tactile feedback, you'll probably find you like it because you've got no reference point, and it's still additional feedback about what your car is doing, because it can do things like, you know, traction loss, wheel slip, as well as engine vibrations. When you do a gear change, for example, you can get a nice thud. Like it's weird because it is like a tactile transducer, but at the same time it isn't, because it's the belts. So when you do the gear change, the belts kind of squeeze you briefly, which makes everything vibrate. But of course, in real life, if you're changing up or down a gear, if you're changing down a gear because you're decelerating, then you would get a little squeeze as you decelerate. But if you're changing down a gear and accelerating, you're actually moving forward, you'd actually be pushed into your seat, or the seat would push into you, sorry, and the belts would be slightly looser. So they've done it in such a way that it gives a similar sort of, you know, boom, like you do with the tactile transducer when you change gear, but it just feels slightly different. I know I'm waffling. I'm trying to just sort of get across, for those of you that have got experience with tactile transducers or motion systems, how this feels different, but how it's still cool and great to have as part of, like, it's a case of, we've got 2 direct drive motors in there, we can add in tactile feedback, so let's add in tactile feedback. Because when I was speaking to the guy, Lucas, on the phone, I said to him, can we control each motor individually? This is when I was thinking that they were going to vibrate themselves, because I was like, then we've effectively got 2 tactile transducers. So we can have one for doing left side and one for doing the right side of the car. So like if your left wheels went over rumble strips, the left-hand motor would vibrate. But we don't have that ability in the software. And now I understand how it vibrates by oscillating the belt tension rather than creating a vibration within the unit itself. I can see why that probably wouldn't work, because you just have one seatbelt kind of vibrating, and that wouldn't really feel like it does in real life. If we went over rumble strips on the left-hand side with our left wheels, yes, it's on the left, and primarily the left-hand suspension's going up and down. That's the origin of the vibration, but we would feel it everywhere. So I think if you try to separate left to right using this system, it might be too isolated and feel a little bit unnatural. But the ability to have those tactile options there, in addition to all the functionality of the belt tensioner for deceleration and for cornering, is really quite cool. And like I say, those direct drive motors, they're hefty, there's some serious weight to the whole unit, they're super smooth, and as you saw in a video clip earlier, they make almost no noise. Well, they don't make any noise. At some point throughout my waffle, I will have put up additional clips of me using it. Obviously, you can't really see what's going on because they don't move that much. When I put the camera at the back, I did try to get an angle where you might see them moving a little bit. I haven't yet seen the footage, so hopefully something shows up there. So the other thing they've got on this unit is, you've probably already seen it in the clips from behind, is that LED bar in the middle of the unit. And, oh, do I need to bring up? I'll try and do it from memory. So that can do a few things. On standby, you get this lovely Knight Rider-esque sort of left to right sweep, which is just cool. And you've got to remember, you can't see this when you're sat in your sim rig. It's just kind of a, we can put this on there because why not, right? For me, I have friends and family come around and we race together. So people will be sat on that sofa behind me and they'll be able to see what it's doing. But yeah, standby light is the sort of Knight Rider mode. Then there is a brake light. So I'm putting a clip of this up now, but whether I say it in the right order or not, I don't know, because I'm not looking at the clip as I say it. So Knight Rider, then there's a brake light. Then I think it's the emergency light. And then I think it's left rear traction loss, right rear traction loss, yellow flag, and reverse. I think that's all of them. So yeah, not something that you need, not something that you can even see, but if your mates or your family are around, they'll get to see it. If you're a streamer and you have a camera that's pointing behind, people will get to see that as well. So that's what the light does. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a why not functionality. The software, Qubic Manager, that could have a whole video on its own, me walking you through that. So I'll just say it's fully featured, it's got everything you need, and it's got all the tuning options for not only the seatbelt tension, you know, from a deceleration and cornering point of view, but all those effects that I mentioned earlier as well. And one of the really important ones from the haptic point of view, the engine vibration, right? I love engine vibration through my haptics, through my rig, and through these belts, but I only have it so that I'm getting vibration at idle, and as I start to accelerate up to about 3,000 to 3,500 RPM, depending on the car. Some idle higher than others, obviously. And the reason for that is because if you have engine RPM all the way through the rev range, you have a constant noise, and that muddies out the other effects that you might be using. Maybe you've got road texture, lumps and bumps on, you know, maybe you've got traction loss on. If you've got a constant RPM based like vibration the entire time, and that's not just for the belt, it's for motion systems, tactile transducers, Buttkickers, always do this. The ability to taper it up at the low RPM and then almost immediately down to off between 3 and 3,500 RPM, so that when you're actually racing and you're up in the revs the whole time, you haven't got your effects being muddied out or you know, diluted because there's a constant engine vibration. So that's a really good one to see in their software. It is bespoke software. You can't use SimHub to control this, so you do have to use the Qubic Manager software, but it's perfectly good software. As I say, it's fully featured, and it would be another video to take you through every single option, and I won't do that now. It's not something you need to know. Just know that it's fine. So I think that's pretty much covered everything. I've shown you what's in the box. I've showed you it installed. We've talked about, you know, the direct drive motors, the build quality, the overall impression I got of you know, Qubic Systems factory and production facility in Poland, and how they try and keep everything in-house, you know, and how high quality is important to them over, you know, having a bigger profit margin and sort of farming things out to the east to save a penny, you know, when they can do it at home in Poland and be able to, you know, do the hardware revisions and the testing and the prototyping all in-house or just round the corner is excellent. I've shown you what the light does on the back, and we've talked about how the haptic options are the effects, the way they actually oscillate the belts to create vibrations, and so they won't work if they're undone, versus what I thought was going to happen, which was the actual unit vibrating because of the oscillation of the motors. And I've mentioned briefly how the software is fine. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Oh, the price. The price of this on their website is currently €1,390. And this is why I say it isn't cheap. I think that's getting on for double the price of the PT actuator tension R, or at least a good £500–600 more. That might be 800 odd quid. I can't quite remember now. But the quality difference is night and day. And I do mean night and day. Not just, you know, the weight of those direct drive motors that are being used, but everything, even the USB cable, which is USB B to A cable, super high quality. Meanwell power supply, a decent, reputable branded power supply. The power supply I actually got with my Tension R from PT Actuator, not only was it not actually manly enough, I discovered this after my review, by the way. It turned out that it wasn't, that they superseded the power supply and were sending out different ones because the one that I got wasn't actually up to the task. But when I looked at the label, and this is typical Chinese scenario here, it gave the voltage and the amps and the watts it was claiming was actually impossible when you did the maths based on the voltage and the amperage. And I was like, yeah, that kind of explains why. And even the picture of the pinout on there, again, I hadn't noticed this in the review because I hadn't looked close enough. The picture of the pinout on the label was actually a completely different shape. It was like a 4-pin pinout, but on the actual unit, it used a barrel plug. So that's kind of like, not there's anything wrong with PT Actuator, because this is a PT Actuator motion system. I've had it for years. It works flawlessly, no problem at all. But that Tension R that I got, I think it was an early unit. Well, it was an early unit, hence the power supply issue. It's an example of how things can be. This Qubic Systems BT1 is an example of the opposite end of what you can get and the experience you can get, where high quality has been prioritised from the beginning, and the phrase "you get what you pay for" very much comes into play here. So, thank you very much for watching. I'll link to the Qubic Systems website. I'm afraid I don't have a discount code for you. If I do get one, then I'll add that into the description as well. But yeah, thanks very much for watching, and as always, take it easy.